Hello and welcome. I appreciate you joining me here live or coming in later on demand. I want to give you just a few pointers for those who are new to Bright Talk or haven't attended presentations on this channel before. Some things I want you to know. First of all, I'm Deb Calvert, and all the content that we have here on the People First Potential channel, well, it's about unleashing potential, yours and that of others, through leadership development, through thinking about the people practices in your organization. It's just all about personal effectiveness in every conceivable way. So, if you are new to the channel and haven't discovered some of our other content, I hope you'll do that. There's a lot here. I've been on Bright Talk presenting at least once a month for about 5 years. Second thing, for all of the presentations here, including this one, be sure and check out the tab right under the video, the one that says attachments, because I like to load you up with some extra goodies. And in this case, there is an infographic summary of what we're going to be talking about today. So you might find that's useful after the presentation. Before the presentation, as we get started, there's also a PDF of today's slides. I know some of you like to have those and to use those to take notes and to share what we discuss. So please help yourself. And then don't miss out on the pointers, the attachments that point to other content, including what's over on People First Leadership Academy. Bear with me here just a moment. I want to explain the difference. The presentations that we do here on Bright Talk, well, just by the nature of the platform, they're one directional. They're short and they're meant to be educational. So they're one way. If you attend live, of course, I always appreciate your questions and I'll answer those too. And in fact, if you come on demand, you can always feel free to contact me too. And even so, right, it's still just a little bit more one directional in terms of I'm delivering the majority of the content to you. Whereas over at People First Leadership Academy, that's peoplefirstpotential.com, that is by its design more interactive. It is, in fact, quite interactive. For most of the presentations that we do, there's some e-learning and there are some recorded presentations. But out of the 40 some odd programs there, most of them are all about being very customized to answer the questions you have and the situations that you're facing right now. So join us over there. In the attachments, you'll see ways that you can do that. Be sure and take my email address, because I'm really serious when I say I want to hear your questions. I want to hear your feedback afterwards. I love it when people give me suggestions for new topics, and we'll pop an extra one in there every once in a while. Here on Bright Talk, the 12 monthly presentations that will be done in 2023 are already posted. So go and register for the ones that look interesting to you. Okay, so with that said, we are going to get rolling on today's topic. Today's topic is all about being motivated. Despite burnout, despite the great resignation and the quiet quit of others around you, despite how you might be feeling yourself because of compassion fatigue or so many other things that are going on, despite all of that, we're going to talk about getting and staying motivated in the work. And I think this nice little quote from Aristotle, well, it says a lot. You know, let me just dial you into where I'm coming from. I know it can't be just me. Sometimes you must also know what it's like to feel unmotivated, right? You sit and you stare at your to-do list and nothing at all on that to-do list inspires you. It's just a string of tasks that you wish you didn't have to do. You'd rather be anywhere else doing anything else. Simply getting started requires tremendous effort. But you don't have to feel that way. You also know what it feels like to be motivated. You have times when you cannot wait to jump right into something. A much anticipated trip, a big project, a learning opportunity, a task that will be truly satisfying. So how do we help others to feel that way too? The second way, motivated, as often as possible at work. That's what we're going to be talking about. But first, I want to spend a few moments sort of defining what motivation is and talking about why it matters. Because, well, let's face it, especially in this day and age, no matter what, people, well, they get a paycheck no matter what we do. So why do we need to spend all this time motivating them? What's the point, right? They're going to show up, they're going to get the paycheck. Doesn't matter if they're motivated. And if for no other reason, I think, yes, it matters. Let me just do the headline here. It matters because we spend so much time at work. Who wants to feel unmotivated and be surrounded by people who feel unmotivated? That negativity, that feeling of having to slog through things, it really weighs you down. So if for no other reason, let's address motivation so that we don't have to have that cloud constantly hanging over our heads. Now, this contrast. This contrast is the first look I want to give you at defining what I mean by motivation. Because if you're in management, there basically are two ways that you get things done through other people. You either light a fire underneath someone, and that phrase, it's meant to suggest that you're coming along and turning up the heat. You're giving people a reason that they have to do something. If you're always doing this, lighting a fire underneath someone, eventually you're going to start looking like a micromanager because you're constantly inspecting, you're constantly requiring, you're constantly coming after people to do things. On the other hand, another technique of management, in fact, I would call this one a technique of leadership that's lesser used than it ought to be. Instead of lighting a fire underneath someone, I'd like you to be thinking about how to ignite a spark within someone. See that second choice, when they already have a spark inside and you fan the flames and you ignite that spark and you help it to burn brighter, well, that's what's going to last longer. That's what's self-sustaining. That is the essence of self-motivation. And if you aren't doing that, whether you've thought about it or not, you're probably relying overmuch on lighting a fire underneath somebody. Either way, we're talking about motivation. So, what do I mean by motivation? I'm a big blanket term. I mean anything that is an inducement to cause someone to pick what they do or the way that they do it. It's an incentive if we think of it in a positive light. It can also come across as a threat if it's more of a negative motivation. It's anything at all, though, that causes a person to do a certain thing or to do it in a certain way. Now, I'm going to break this down into two dimensions so that we can really look at motivation from all the angles. You've probably heard this phrase, carrot versus stick. Right? So let me make sure that I give you the background for this one. Not everybody probably has heard this before. Carrot versus stick. It's meant to describe two ways to motivate people. Imagine it like this. Imagine a donkey, and the donkey has a full load on its back. There are two ways that you can get the donkey moving. You can either dangle a carrot in front of the donkey, so he'll walk forward toward the carrot, and he'll continue to walk toward the carrot. He's now moving with that load on his back. The other way, though, is to hit the poor donkey on the back with a stick so that he'll move forward to avoid that pain. The carrot represents positive motivation. In the workplace, positive motivation would be things like rewards and recognition. Positive motivation offers something that you would like to have. The stick represents a negative motivation like fear of loss or some sort of pain. Negative motivation causes you to try and avoid something that you believe will be unpleasant. Now, what you see on screen, this list of 10 items, what you see there are what people say in response to the question, what is most motivating to you at work? What is most motivating to you at work? These are the 10 answers that people give the most often. And you'll notice that every single one of those, all 10, would be more like a carrot than a stick. All 10 are pretty much positives as opposed to negatives. Now, I'm going to bring this list back to you in just a little while, but let me throw in another dimension as we're framing up motivation here, and we're looking at it from a couple of different angles. Keep carrot and stick, positive, negative in mind. But there's also this other way to break down motivation. And that is, where does it come from? Is the motivation Extrinsic, meaning it comes from outside of an individual. This is what somebody's offering you or threatening you with outside of you. Intrinsic motivation, this would be more like that spark, the one that burns bright and is within you. This is a motivation that comes from inside of you. It's driven by something that you truly care about, something that's deeply meaningful or important to you, something that genuinely interests or excites you. It's inside of you. So intrinsic, that's that you want to do something all by yourself. You want to do it. It has its own rewards for you. Extrinsic is when somebody else is wanting it, trying to make you do something that they want you to do. So let's say, let me give you an example here. Let's say we've got somebody who works in technology. An extrinsic motivation for that person and that job would be that they could earn a raise or a promotion if they do X amount of whatever their KPIs require. But an intrinsic motivation, that would be someone who is passionate about innovation. They love creating solutions that make people's lives easier, that make tasks go faster. And they'll work hard. That spark is ignited when they have an opportunity to have that kind of impact. That would be more like the intrinsic motivation. Now I'm going to do an overlay and put both of these pieces together. We're going to look at carrot and stick, positive, negative, and intrinsic, extrinsic all together here. Bear with me here because this is going to give you some interesting stuff to take back to the workplace. We're mapping these two different things to understand four kinds of motivation in this simple little box model. The first one is the positive and the negative, the carrot and the stick that we talked about. You can light a fire underneath somebody with negative motivations like fear or pressure. And you can also motivate people extrinsically in a positive way with, well, let's face it, what basically is a bribe. If you do this, I'll reward you with that. And whether it's positive or negative, extrinsically, both are going to have a limited impact. Some people won't respond at all. Some will respond for a while, but not over the long term. So keep that in mind. Okay, now that's positive, negative. Extrinsic, intrinsic. Extrinsic meaning from the outside, that's someone who's pushing for, requesting, driving the motivation from outside of you. Intrinsic means from the inside, where the individual personally desires something for their own reasons. And for the long term, not moment to moment or day to day, but for the long term, intrinsic motivation has a lot more staying power. So you put these two things together, you have four different scenarios. I'm going to start in the upper left-hand box. Somebody who's saying, if you finish that project on time, you'll get a bonus, right? That manager is leveraging positive extrinsic motivation to try to drive behaviors. That same manager who might be getting desperate under pressure might say something like, you'd better finish that project on time or you're out of here, you're fired. Still extrinsic, but now it's negative. Now, you probably already have caught on to this. What you see on the left side, that is primarily what you see in the average workplace. Whether it's positive or negative, extrinsic motivations are what we see so much more often. Trying to motivate people with something that is outside of that person, that is sort of generic. We leverage extrinsic motivation a whole lot more than we do intrinsic. So over to the right side, intrinsic. This comes from inside a person. You're saying it yourself. I'm so excited about this project. I'm so eager to complete it. This is going to be awesome. That's intrinsic positive motivation. You really want to do it. So you're going to work harder. You're going to work faster. You're going to maintain motivation throughout it, much more likely than if you had either of the extrinsic motivators operating without anything intrinsic. And yes, there's also negative intrinsic motivation. It keeps us from doing some things. It keeps us from making some mistakes too. So it serves a purpose. But it could be something like, I am staying far away from this. I don't like this kind of work. I don't want to do that kind of project. And so we are motivated or demotivated by something that comes from inside of us. So, what we need to be thinking about here is what works best. We've got four choices. We know that the ones on the left hand side are the ones that more often get used in the average workplace. But the funny thing is, that's not what's most effective. What's most effective when it comes to motivation, we already said is carrot, because look, our top 10 reasons all have positives, not negatives. So we know positive works better. But even though people say these items, which are mostly extrinsic, even though these are the answers that people come up with when asked what causes you to be more motivated in the workplace, people just don't seem to realize that there's this other option. That in fact, you could have intrinsic motivation, something from within you. And that if you thought about that and recognized it and leveraged it, it would be far more effective than all these traditional go to standard extrinsic motivators. So, where I left you, back to the next question. What works the best? By far, the very, very strongest type of motivation is positive intrinsic motivation. When we're excited about something, when it's challenging and interesting, when it serves a purpose that resonates with us and ignites that little spark of passion inside of us, that kind of motivation is far more effective than anything else. Second most effective is negative, intrinsic motivation, also coming from inside of us. And then number three, the one we use most often in workplaces, which is positive extrinsic, the bribe. And the least effective of all, still used quite often in workplaces, though, even though it's the least effective, that's the negative extrinsic motivation. So I say this to you because you might be leaving opportunities on the table. You may not be motivating people if you are in that space of extrinsic motivation all the time, because it it's standard, it's easy, it's familiar, it seems fair. A caution, you're missing out, and maybe it isn't all that fair, and it certainly isn't all that effective. So I want to break this down for you, tell you why it doesn't work and what you can be doing differently and when and how to use extrinsic motivation. Remember, if you're attending live, I will take questions as they come. I'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end, but don't wait till then to post them. And if you're attending on demand, I'll give you my email address again at the end, because I genuinely enjoy getting your questions along the way. So I've just told you that we're really wanting to aim more often for intrinsic positive motivation. But I'm going to pause because I know some of you are having a shocked response right now, wondering, what do you mean it doesn't work? Extrinsic motivation, extrinsic positive motivation. We have rewards programs, we have entire recognition systems. We've used that in our talent review and in our annual performance appraisal reward system. So I apologize for what I've just told you that may be a bit shocking. I'm not suggesting that you scrap all the rest of that. I am wanting you to think about the fact that there's more, that there are alternatives that do work better. You know, extrinsic motivation, especially when that's all you've got, it has some pretty serious drawbacks. The first one is, I've already teed it up, it's not sustainable. As soon as you withdraw the punishment or the reward, or as soon as the reward is something that people take for granted, it's just the day-to-day stuff. Well, as soon as you withdraw those, intentionally or not, the motivation is gone too. If the motivation is linked to the carrot or the stick, and you take the carrot or the stick away or let it become background, the motivation goes away with it. And the second of the kind of serious drawbacks you want to take into account here is that you're going to get diminishing returns. You're going to get a gradual but persistent decline in motivation, even if the punishment or the rewards are unchanged. So you would have to be increasing the reward or the punishment just to stay at the same level of motivation. Now, last but not least, i- if you are extrinsically motivating somebody, you might be completely zapping, taking away their intrinsic motivation. That's what this quote that you see from Alfred Cohen, that's what that's all about. When you punish or reward people for doing something, it removes it replaces their own innate desire to do it on their own for their own reasons. You interfere with their desire to do the very thing that you want them to do. And I'll tell you a true story about this. I spent a lot of years in sales. I was selling newspaper advertising and I was kicking butt. I was a very, very good salesperson. And I loved going out and meeting with my customers, putting together advertising campaigns in the newspaper. Yeah, I'm that old. And I loved when they would get results. It was thrilling for me to share in that success and to feel like I was genuinely helping them do what they wanted to do, achieve what they wanted to achieve in business. So I was doing so well in my advertising territory. It was just growing like leaps and bounds. My boss's boss came into our office one day and he made a big to do about my success. And he had talked to me a few times, what are you doing and how do you do it? Anyways, he created a contest and it was basically the see if you can beat Deb Calvert contest. That became its tagline. And I was so embarrassed. And there was a financial incentive attached to it and there was a leaderboard and it went on for I don't know 2 or 3 months. It was a pretty long period of time. And it was so embarrassing that I thought about quitting. And it was also so I f icky to me. I felt like now I was going out and doing things for the wrong reason, not for my customers, not because it genuinely thrilled and excited me to help them, but now there was all this other stuff, this prestige and this money. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with prestige or money. I like them, but I like them not for the prestige and the money alone. I like what they could bring to me and what I can do with them. And nobody was tapping into that. And they took it away from me so that I wasn't tapping into it myself either. So just be careful. If you're using extrinsic motivations, be careful. Be careful that you don't accidentally impair the intrinsic motivation that matters so much more. So let me just say a little bit more about that. Right, intrinsic, the self-determination, that ability to maintain control of our choices, the the spark within us, that's what we want to maintain. That's what we want to be able to give to people. We don't want to accidentally cause them to feel that somebody's inspecting, that somebody is controlling, that somebody else is pressuring them. All of that diminishes the intrinsic motivation. And we also ought to be dignifying and celebrating and recognizing what matters to individuals. So, whereas extrinsic motivations are inherently generic, intrinsic motivation, the type of motivation that really matters, is deeply personal. You have to understand a person to understand what individually, personally motivates them. You have to take the time to get to know somebody, to to let people know that you care enough about what matters to them if you want to tap into intrinsic motivation. You can't fan the spark. You can't ignite that spark if you don't even know what that spark is. And sure, you might try a couple of different things and hope you get lucky. Sometimes you will. What's that saying? Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. But you can do better. We're talking about no cost, not much time, high value, just to get to know somebody well enough to find out what's important to them. Why are they showing up to work here every day anyway? What does it get them in life? What matters to them? What are their values? What are the sorts of things that cause them to gravitate to the type of work that they do? When you know those little things and you help people self-discover them and acknowledge them for themselves, well, that's how you ignite sparks. That's how you avoid minimizing their own interest or suppressing their spark or maybe even putting out that flame, that very same flame that you hired them for. Now, I do have to come back to this list. I promised you that I would. So, Earlier, we looked at the same list, the list of what people say are the things that motivate them at work, and the top 10 responses are again on screen here. Now that we've talked a little bit about intrinsic versus extrinsic, I wanted to just revisit this. You'll notice that all but one, I think, are extrinsic, outside of a person. I'm interpreting the one that says made a difference. It's number 3 on the list. I'm interpreting that one as a feeling, something inside of you that you made a difference or that you could make a difference. And maybe since that's a hot button for me, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I think that's probably fair to say that one's intrinsic. So why then? Why are all these other 9 top workplace motivators, why are they seemingly contradicting what we've now said about the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of extrinsic motivators? Well, it's because we don't even think about being internally motivated or about others being internally motivated. People have to be specifically reminded and even prompted before they go there. And most managers aren't even trained in this. So that's all they've got. They have to use extrinsic external motivations because they don't know what they don't know. Just think about the lost opportunities here, the cost of no one really knowing how to create an environment where people can find their intrinsic motivation and be continually gratified by it, doing work that's meaningful to them, doing work for reasons that are their own and that matter. Think of all that money lost on reward systems that ultimately diminish individual motivation and all the feelings of lost self determination, lost self esteem. If all you're doing is relying on extrinsic motivators, even the ones that people say matter most to them. Now, I will say one other thing about this. I believe that the things on this list are good. I think they can all be used wisely. But I think if you try to make them stand on your own, that's where you lose out. You give people, let's say, paid time off, bonus time off as a reward. Somebody wins that year after year. Doesn't take long. By the 3rd or 4th year, they've come to expect it. They no longer see it as a bonus. It's just a gimme. And it no longer is motivating to them. The way that you keep using these extrinsic motivators in a way that helps unleash the intrinsic motivation, the one that's more powerful, is that you peel it back. Okay? So, what are you going to do with that time off? Why does that time off matter to you? What are you working for this year? How will you use your time off if you earn it again? And by just getting people to remember it and think of it in that way, pretty soon you're to intrinsic motivation. Oh, that time with my family, my parents always come into town and I like having those extra days with everybody all together. You find the reason behind why they work for what they work for. And it matters. It matters an awful lot to do this because in any workplace, what you really want to be doing is increasing intrinsic motivation. The more you do this, the less you're going to have to rely on that extrinsic motivation, the kind that has some pretty high prices attached to it. So let me just park on this slide for a minute and talk with you about it. So to increase intrinsic motivation, these are some choices. You want those people around you, and maybe even you, to be motivated more often intrinsically. I'm talking about motivated in a way that can be sustained so you don't have to keep coming along and lighting a fire under people. So here's what you offer to people. Maybe it's not the whole list for everyone. Maybe it's a bit of a multiple choice. Once you know somebody and what motivates them, you'll know what is going to be more effective, what you should be offering them. So, top of the list, offering people a challenge. Not a ridiculous, outsized challenge, but a little one. A challenge that's just a little bit bigger than their current level of skill. A challenge where they've got most of the right abilities and outlooks and experiences. They're going to put them together in a new way. It's a challenge that says, you're going to stretch a little bit, and I believe in you. I think you're ready. I think you could do this. I'm excited to see what you do about it, this challenge. And you position it in a way for the people that this would be appealing to. You position it in a way that is relevant for them. Okay? Don't give me a challenge that involves a whole lot of mathematical figures and stats and data. Even though I might be able to do it, that'll zap me. That's not motivating. It's not interesting. Instead, give me a challenge where I'm going to take the numbers that you put together and I'm going to find the story behind those numbers and the reasons why. Because I love building a puzzle, solving a puzzle. And so that's going to be really interesting and engaging for me. Next on the list, maybe you give somebody a little more control. Maybe you, again, are saying, um, you've earned the right. I trust you. I think this is something that you could do better than I could do it, maybe. And if there's a little learning along the way, that's okay. I trust you to make the decisions and figure out how to address the obstacles along the way. You get some autonomy here. For some people, more than others, that would be very, very intrinsically motivating. Again, for some, the opportunity to collaborate and to cooperate, to work with others, to be a part of a team, to have the support of others and the ideas and the exchange. For some, that would be extremely motivating in and of itself, regardless of what the work product or expectations are. It's that synergy that comes from working with others. Now let's talk about recognition, because all by itself that sounds like an extrinsic motivator. But if you want your recognition to be really received well, you're going to make it meaningful. And how do you make recognition meaningful? Well, you make it personal. You make it not about the outcome or the product that's been delivered. You make it about the effort from the individual, the way that individual went about the work, the values that that individual infused into the work, the affirmation of the individual. You make it personal. You don't make it generic. That's the difference between recognition being extrinsic and then peeling it back to make it more intrinsic and to make it more meaningful. For some, right, happiness, sense of belonging, friends in the workplace, really enjoying and having a good camaraderie with people. That might be a motivating something. And so you want to give people access to that. And although I've used the word a couple times already, I also wanted to call it out separately here. The last word on the list, might not even be able to see it where I'm sitting, but that word, that secret word, is trust. Right? People are motivated when they know someone trusts them, when they've earned that trust, and they don't want to disappoint somebody who trusts them. They want to rise up to the expectations and be able to meet them. That sort of trust is extremely motivating. I've had bosses who I would do anything to avoid disappointing them because they trusted me, because that trust was something that I knew, I had worked hard for, and I wanted to maintain it. I cared what they thought about me and how they trusted me, how they esteemed me. Now, when you can do any combination of these things at an individual level, you're going to have intrinsic motivation firing in all cylinders, and that's powerful. So, as you look at these benefits, I want you to think about them for yourself too. Right? You've been in situations like this, you've been intrinsically motivated at some point, and when that happened, you probably found that you could focus. You didn't have all the distractions. You could really focus and you could concentrate, and you could be really in the zone with that work. It felt good to be doing it. And maybe because of the focus, maybe because of the commitment you had to the work, right? You did a better job. You cared so much about the work that you put your best effort into it, and maybe extra time and discretionary effort went into it. People who are intrinsically motivated are also less likely to grouse about the work. They're focused and they're caring and they're interested, so they're not going to be as likely to procrastinate or to complain, to miss deadlines, to kind of go through the motions. It's just going to be better work, and they feel better about it. Last but not least, People who are intrinsically motivated, they've had that internal spark ignited. Well, they like their work. They might even say they love their work. And these are highly engaged employees, people who don't want to consider job offers somewhere else. They're loyal because they love the work and they love that they've been able to be in an environment where they could be self-motivated and that was sustainable. Now, I did also tell you that there are times and places to use extrinsic motivation. So let's talk about that. So, don't scrap all of your extrinsic motivational programs and processes that you have. But do think about how can you over time, how can you infuse more intrinsic motivation and phase out some of the extrinsic motivation? This is a slow replacement process. If you have a situation right now, and I know some of you do, if you've got a situation right now where it's rough in your environment, people are burned out, they're overburdened because a lot of folks have quit, and you feel like there's a revolving door. It's just so hard to get people to stay in the job. And as a result of that, everybody's overburdened, but also people are doing tasks they really didn't sign up for to try to share that workload. If intrinsic motivation is in short supply because of those environmental conditions, you probably should infuse some extrinsic motivation. Make sure people know it's for the short term. Make sure they know it's a one-off. This is not some new pay raise everybody's getting forever, but this is for the short term to get people through the woods. And I got to say this, I don't want to let this unsaid. Um, Along with that, you need to have a plan for getting people out of the woods. Plopping some extrinsic motivation like a bonus out there and letting things ride the way they are is not acceptable. That's a formula for implosion. And if you don't know how to do that, I'm going to put my email address up again at the end. Let's talk because that needs to be addressed. All right. Now, if you have a team that's got a lot of extrinsic motivation right now, you can't yank it all and expect them to stay motivated. That will feel like you have given them a pay cut or done something to them. So you've got to be gradual about this. If an individual is not intrinsically motivated, they're at a bad place in their life. It happens to all of us, right? That something isn't working for them. You might need to use a stick, sort of a motivation, or a carrot if it's somebody who you can really empathize with and see what's going on and you just want to help them out. You've got an extra little burst of energy that's needed for a sales blitz or something else that's temporary. Well, maybe that's another place because people can't do the work that usually intrinsically motivates them. You've got to have a temporary replacement. Maybe that should be extrinsic motivation. But remember, you're using this as the buildup. Be sure to communicate and mean it that this is a temporary sort of a fix. And don't do what was done to me. Don't put inducements or incentives on work that people are already intrinsically motivated to do because you don't want to zap their intrinsic motivation. But start talking a lot about what it is that makes work meaningful. Get some values codified for your organization and get people participating in creating what the vision is, what the values are, what the mission is, so they see the meaning and the purpose of their work and they're a part of that. And then day to day, here's how you maintain that intrinsic motivation. Well, you keep people informed, right? There's a whole lot here we've said about there being trust and a sense of belonging. And if you've got confusion and a lack of clarity and information isn't being shared transparently, that's going to diminish any kind of motivation that you might put out there. Day to day, you can also distribute leadership, distribute the decision making, let people know that what they have to offer is meaningful, it's important. This is about ennobling people, making sure that they understand that what they have to offer is useful and valued by the organization. Day to day, you also want a culture that unifies people. Some shared learning, that could be mentoring opportunities, it could be buddy systems, whatever it is. Give people opportunities to learn and to grow and to connect so that they see that there is a future possibility for them within the organization. That too is motivating for some intrinsically. Find out why that would matter and be sure you peel it back to help them see it that way. Learning and development experiences, they do fire a lot of intrinsic motivations for people's future. People are thinking about their health, their well-being, their family, their future, their esteem. All sorts of intrinsic motivations are tied in with learning opportunities. So you want to give people a variety. They don't all have to be go into a room and sit together for a full day getting some sort of training experience on the skills and tactics of how we do our job here. It could be all sorts of other things, soft skills and personal development and leadership development. And you don't have to be a part of all of them. You might just give people ideas about where they can go to access some of that. We offer a lot of it for free over at People First Leadership Academy. So it's resources like that that you're going to want to utilize to make sure people are seeing you, the organization, as a purveyor of opportunities for them so that they can learn and grow if that's what intrinsically motivates them. Let me wrap you up with a quote from Zig Ziglar that I really like. I think it just captures exactly what we've been talking about here. Whatever you're doing for motivation, whatever you've done in the past for motivation, it's always going to have an expiration date. You've got to be sure that you're motivating people all the time. And since we are looking for what's easy, fast, low cost, the only thing that's all the time is intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation inside the individual, you fan the flame, but it's going to keep them going if you're able to tap into what intrinsically motivates each individual. Okay, now that wraps up our topic, whirlwind. I don't see any new questions posted, but you're welcome to email me at any time with questions. There's my email address. People First Leadership Academy's URL is also on screen. I'd love to talk with you if you need some additional support in your organization. The work we do around consulting and coaching and training is all about putting people first, about people practices in an organization. I have a favor to ask you. If you would please go ahead and post a review for me here. I always appreciate it when you do that. That just helps me to be able to know what was meaningful to you, what worked for you, what it is that you'd like to see more or less of. You can intrinsically motivate me by giving me just a little bit of feedback so I don't have to make it up month to month. I can make sure that I'm on target. I hope you'll join us again in future months for topics that are of interest to you here on the People First Potential channel. And I really appreciate your time today. Have a good month. Happy Thanksgiving for those who are here in the U.S. We'll see you soon.